being a change communicator when everything is changing. So like I said, we're so excited to have you guys here. My name's Erica. You can't see me, but you can totally hear me. And I do events and communication at the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication up in Portland. We have 2 graduate programs up there, strategic communication, which is a lot of what this presentation focuses on, and we also have a master's program in multimedia journalism. We're excited to do this today and kind of kick this off because we miss engaging with the community, the media, you know, those communicators out there, especially our students as well. And also because our program's really focused on these social justice issues. So, you know, we really want to use storytelling and weaving into, you know, kind of creating a better world out there as much as we can. And it's hard to do that right now when we're all feeling so isolated in our homes. And so we wanted to, you know, bring it on this digital platform and utilize what we can utilize to still be who we are and, you know, talk about those issues and make the world a better place. Like I mentioned, we will be using a couple different features throughout this webinar just to really want to engage with you guys, to each other, so, and with the panelists as well. So we're going to be, you guys are doing great using the chat function, so happy that everyone's kind of used to Zoom and understanding what that is. We're gonna kind of use the chat function so you guys can talk to each other, talk to the panelists. We'll also be sharing some resources on there. Or links to other outside resources. So that's where you can kind of just find supplemental information if you need to. And we really want you guys to use the Q&A box if you have questions. So that should be a little, you know, toggled panel on your screen. There's a Q&A, write questions in there. And then when there are breaks throughout the presentation, we'll be announcing those questions and addressing them for you. So we can, you know, kind of keep you guys engage as much as we can and answer those questions as they come up. And we'll be offering lots of pauses, time for reflection, a time for you guys to get those questions out there, just so we can help you with anything we can. If you are having any kind of technical help, you can't see the slides or you can't see the screen for whatever reason, our host is here to help you. So and that's the University of Oregon School of Journalism logo you should be able to see. There's back end, her name's Jessica Black. She will be, you can write a private chat to her specifically and she can try to help you troubleshoot. So we're there for you as much as we possibly can. Like I mentioned also, we are at home as well. So if for some reason the Wi-Fi drops or there's a dog barking in the background, please be patient with us. It might happen, especially when the mailman comes about this time of day for myself. We're still here. The Wi-Fi will come back. There are other people on the line. So yeah, be patient with us as we go. Like I said, we will probably pause quite a bit for questions, reflection, things like that. And just so you know, we will be emailing all of this content to you after the webinar. So you'll be getting a nice email from us. It'll include, this is being recorded, just so you know, and you'll get a copy of that recording once we're finished. I think, unless I'll go ahead and kick it over to our wonderful speakers and kind of introduce them for you today. We have Donna Davis, who's the director of our Strategic Communication Graduate Program here at the University of Oregon. She's fantastic. She's not only a great educator, a great mentor, a great director and faculty member to our amazing students, but she's got over 25 years of public relations experience in fundraising, nonprofit communication. So happy to have you here, Donna. Thank you for joining us. And we also have Erin Hart, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Spitfire Strategies. She's definitely a leader in change communication. Follow her on Twitter. She is amazing. She works for the foundations, nonprofits, government agencies to help them engage with their audiences and develop programs for social justice. So I am going to stop talking and totally kick it over to you, Donna and Erin. And we're here if you need anything and happy to help.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Erica. And thank you again, Erin, for being here with me today on this very first, our inaugural webinar series. So, being first always comes with a lot of interesting opportunities. So even looking at the image that was up there just a second ago, it's amazing how a month of isolation can make you look 8 years older. I'm going to blame COVID. So just to quickly walk you through what the next half hour, 40 minutes is going to look like. Our agenda for today is in front of you. We've got a number of questions that we're going to run through. At the end of each of those, we will pause, take questions, do our best to answer them, and keep moving along. So we'll be starting out with exactly what is change communication, and I'm looking really forward to the answer to that, as there are so many different ways that people define the work, especially the field that Erin is in, where we all are trying to make the world a better place and doing the right thing. We'll then go into how is it changing. We hear brands and organizations and for-profit corporations talking about marketing for the greater good during this time of pandemic. So, how are the messages changing depending on whose voice is being used? And with that voice also comes tone. And we know how much how much tone matters. We've seen people be tone deaf in good days. Being tone deaf today, it could be catastrophic. And then we'll wrap it up with both the opportunities and the challenges that we're facing as communicators, especially in the field of social change, social justice, and those profits that are the nonprofits, NGOs, foundations that are different than corporate communications. And how do we have to think about it that way? And I say it that way because there are certain words that I have suddenly discovered in the last week have become so cliche. I want to do my best not to use the word pivot. I've given it that one time and I'm not going to say it again. But think about all of those things we're saying now that we wouldn't have said. We all know what PPEs are, all of these things that are changing us. So let's move right into, actually, before we move into change communication, we have a quick poll for you. So I think our trusty assistant, Jessica, there it is. We'd like to get a sense of who you are and what kind of organization you currently work with. So as we work through what is change communication, we'd like to know a little bit about those of you who are joining us today. So if you'd take a second to fill out the poll, and we'll come back to that at the in just a couple of minutes. So while you're doing that, let's also go right into, and this is where I'm going to throw it to you, Erin, and say, how do we define change communication, or what does it mean to be a change communicator? And I say that when I think about organizations and educational institutions that are jumping into social change, public interest communication, social innovation. There are lots of different ways that we think about what is change communication today. So let's start there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good place to start, because I would anticipate that every one of us on this call probably has a slightly different definition for that. And to some degree, that's okay. But when we think about what it means to be a sector of this industry, to be public interest communicators, there are some kind of underpinnings that we've all agreed are part of that definition. And the bottom line is that public interest communication is looking for a social or environmental benefit. We want to see that outcome. We're not really interested in ego metrics. Don't care how many hits we got, how many followers we have. If it is a proxy measure that's going to lead to some great outcome for society, for social and environmental justice, great, then we want it. Otherwise, meh, what's it really worth? So that matters. And then when we think about, and I do identify my role as being one in public interest communications, but when we talk about public interest or social change, the follow-up question usually is, well, how do you define that? What is the public interest? What is social change? And the simplest answer to that question that I can give is it's the definition, and the answer is determined by science. So if someone wants to tell me that they believe it's in the public interest to have more guns in people's hands because they believe that that is in support of the Second Amendment and therefore in the public interest, I say, actually, no, science tells us that gun violence moves and grows and spreads in the same way that disease does. So that's how I'm able to say, look, this isn't me making a just sort of personal assertion about if it's a good thing that more people are buying guns during a pandemic. It's not me making that judgment. It's what we know about how violence spreads and what that does to communities and what that does to folks who are in situations of domestic violence, what that does to folks who are considering suicide. There are scientific underpinnings behind all of that. So that's not, hey, me making a judgment based on my values. It's based on what we know from science and research, and that's how we define it. So that's probably the simplest definition I can give to what public interest communication is.
That's wonderful. And I want to remind folks that we will pause in between each of these big areas and ideas for any questions that you might have. Please feel free to type them into the Q&A and we'll get to those as we go. And if you find that we have too many, if we find there's too many questions, we'll have a little bit of an after class sort of 15-minute, we can sit and chat with you a little bit afterwards as well to cover anything that we don't get during the time that we're moving along here. So, and it's super interesting as we talk about change communication and social change and public interest. I think that especially in the time that we're living right now, we would say, well, who is the public and what is their interest? So that can be such a nuanced answer. And I think similarly, social change, we also think of social justice that doesn't cover environmental change and environmental justice. So there are organizations that are looking at how do you make the world a better place, and that comes from lots of different directions. So, and I think we've got folks, and I'm actually really looking forward to seeing the results of the poll to get a sense of who's making up the people that are watching right now. And Jessica, do you have that information? Look at that. So one benefit corporation, lots of educators, nonprofit, private, for-profit, and foundations. So great. It looks like educators are our dominant group today, followed by nonprofit. So great. Thank you for sharing that with us. So moving on from what is change communication, the next big thing is when you and I talked about putting this webinar together, my immediate thought is when we're in the business of change communication, how do you do that when everything is changing? So, and you and I, and in our conversation, you said, I think it's really important to understand that crisis communication is not the same thing as communicating in a crisis or during a crisis. So can you riff on that for a bit as somebody who, especially as somebody who counsels organizations when things are good and when things are bad, and what is the difference here and what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's well, for any of us in any situation when we're communicating, we always want to think about what's the result that we want, who's the person that can make that happen. And that's the short answer to who your audience is. That group of decision makers is the audience you need to reach. Now, sometimes we can get directly to them. Sometimes we need to first address a group that's going to influence them. So having that clarity on who we're trying to reach because we need them to do something is really important. But the other piece of that is, kind of just basics. It's context, right? So I know when, working with students, you have them do a landscape analysis. Before we look at developing any kind of communication plan or messaging, we look at the context of who else is out there talking in the world, what's happening, what are they saying that aligns with what you're doing, what are they saying that's at odds with what you're doing. And so right now, we just have a pretty extreme thing happening that's creating that context for us, right? Like that. And so a lot of folks that I talk to right now and that I've been speaking to over the last month or so have called me to say, well, I think we have some crisis communication to do. And I'm like, really? If you have information that benefits directly is going to affect someone's health and welfare, you probably do have crisis communication to do. So let's talk about that. For most people though, it's, wow, a big thing's happening and I still need to figure out how and if I should communicate. And that's that difference between, are you doing actual crisis communication work or are you trying to communicate during a crisis? And so, we outlined some basic principles for folks about what it means to communicate during a crisis, which is really different. And the thing that I always say to start with, which sounds a little no duh when I say it out loud, is to start by being compassionate. Because as people, we're all really good about that individually. And then when we go into organizational mind, we get really focused on what are the things I need to say? What do I need someone to do with them? And we lose that compassion sometimes. And that fails to recognize, when we do that, we miss an important recognition of the context that our audience might be experiencing. So maybe an audience is expecting information from us and they want the information from us. And maybe they're also managing having some kids at home. Maybe they have a sick family member that they're caring for. So if we pull that compassion out of it, we miss a real opportunity to connect with our audience. So as no duh as it may sound to say that aloud, we always remind folks of that. And then beyond that, you're making some judgment calls about if you are doing crisis communication or if you're communicating during the crisis. So if you're not offering information, relative to COVID-19, you're thinking about who your audience is and if they're in the mindset that they're prepared to engage with you. If it's an audience that's already engaged and involved and cares about what you're doing, then you probably do want to keep working with them. If you're saying, hey, I'm interested in introducing some important information about climate change to new audiences, probably not a time to go to a new audience with information, because the mindset that they're in right now is one in which they already feel relatively overwhelmed. And so taking yet new, more new information to them, it's probably not going to be the best time to get them to act on that information. And so that's the difference that we try to tease out with folks so that they can figure out, all right, do you really need to have a crisis plan, or do you just need to adjust the communication that you have to be more appropriate for that context?
I've noticed even in the work that we're doing and trying to navigate what's coming, and navigate is another one of those words that I'm trying really hard not to use because I'm used to doing.
Yep.
That there are so many nuances in that you have some people who say, I need more communication. And, the leadership isn't giving us enough information. Sometimes leadership doesn't have the information to give. And especially right now, when people are saying, when can I get back to work? When can I get back to face-to-face? When can I get back to And we just don't know yet. And even it depends on what state you live in as to what that answer might be and who the leadership and what it's by the minute changing. So sometimes transparency and communication is difficult unless you're saying, hang on, we don't know yet. And you can only say that for so long, right?
Well, I mean, that's actually a perfectly acceptable answer. And, I've done a fair bit of actual crisis communication in addition to making these determinations about if you communicate during a crisis. And in a crisis, you always have a situation where there are things you don't know. So if it's an oil spill that is affecting, animals and habitat and people and economy, you never know all the facets of that at any moment in time. You can say what you know when you know it, and you can say, and this is when I'll be back. And that's the key, because if you try to answer things that you're unable to answer, you're probably lying. And that's never good, because you're just making things up because you feel like you need an answer. So that's never good territory to be standing in. So you can say, here's what I know right now, and I will be back at 2 o'clock this afternoon or 10 a.m. tomorrow. Because if folks have something like that they can connect with, if they don't have the information, they say, okay, great, this is what I have for now. This can tide me over until this update that has been promised to me that's coming at this time. And that's the best that you can do in situations like that. But that's also why the messenger matters. So it's who's delivering that information matters as much as the information that you're providing.
And I think that is also, I mean, I go back to also the thing that we keep hearing in the conversations that I'm having with a lot of people right now is that if we go back to look at what we understand foundationally, these are good practices, whether it's a pandemic or not.
That's right, totally.
How do you get back to your core understanding of what we do and apply it and stick to it. So I'd like to take a second before we move on to the next slide, because we did have a question from Sam who was really,
hi, Sam.
Yeah, looking at a minute ago when you were talking about the science determination that you were talking about and being able to talk about it from a science perspective. He says, Sam says, however, how do you navigate the space of the he said, they said? My science is more valid than your science, and in some spaces that line becomes more tricky. Environmental issues, for example, we tend to get stuck in that trap versus resource development. And boy, howdy, are we also not hearing that right now as we're balancing safety and economy.
Yeah, it really comes down to considering the source a lot of the time, you know, particularly when it's politically charged in a situation like what we have relative to the, you know, public health data that we're all trying to get access to and consume right now. The same is true in environmental settings. There are super nuanced moments when you have, let's say, a group of conservation scientists that are working together that understand the ins and outs of the data in a robust way. And there are moments like that where there may be disagreement on the data, and it's important disagreement to discuss and to tease out and say, okay, what do we know that we're going to move forward with? That's a scientific conversation, which is different than the communications conversation. And so the communications conversation that I'm talking about is one that's kind of informing definition. And in that situation, we are very much considering the source. Is this a source of trusted data? Is it a source, you know, are we looking at longitudinal data? Or are we looking at someone who has said, I have decided that I no longer trust any institution. I will make up data that reinforces my point of view and present it as scientific information. And in that moment, we're really considering the source. And so there absolutely are judgment calls that are part of this. You know, to say that there aren't would be crazy pants, because of course there are judgment calls. But I think we can back up those judgment calls that we're making with things like, this is World Health Organization data that's been readily available to us over numbers of years that, you know, we can trust in these ways. And again, that's a judgment call. I choose to believe things that, you know, come from the World Health Organization. Do they make mistakes? Sure they do. Do they have a lot of really solid, you know, trusted data that we should use? Absolutely. Now, that's a judgment call that I make, but it's one that I feel that I can back up based on, you know, decades upon decades of good, solid, actionable data. So that's the communication conversation, I think, around what science we trust versus, you know, there are those really important moments for researchers who are smarter about that kind of stuff than I am, for sure, that they do need to tease that out. And I hope that answers that, Sam. We can chat more about that later.
Absolutely. And I'm thrilled to see there's a real hunger right now for good science and trust and respect of scientists. And I know there are a number of students and former students that are on our call right now that have had to put up with me in our courses talking about what's your source and how did you vet your source and how do it's like, no, you can't use, yes, you can use Wikipedia, but not as the source. Go to Wikipedia and then find the original
layer down
that are cited there, and then dig into them and see, are they sponsored? Are they, you know, what are their themes? So always trying to look at your own biases and understand the biases of your sources and of the people that you're trying to communicate with.
Absolutely.
So again, this is a time that I would like to remind you, feel free to add a question in the Q&A and click on the little Q&A box, and we'll try to answer those as we go. So yeah, Olivia, Wikipedia and. I do always say that. It's like a broken record. They put up with me. So our next slide is one that came out of another event I recently attended, where they were talking from a corporate and brand perspective, and they're saying, of course, now today we've got to do marketing for the greater good, and they basically were suggesting that everything is change communication today. And we see this especially in the advertising field, where advertisers have really had to change their messages. And it's fascinating if you watch television, and I think a lot of folks are doing a lot of that right now, that just watching the change of the messaging in ads and how tricky that can be. So can we talk a little bit about, is everything marketing for the greater good right now? And how do you see that play out with the people that you're working with?
I don't think everything is marketing for the greater good right now. I think a lot of folks recognize the value in presenting something as marketing for the greater good. There's been a variety of studies, one or two that really stood out, that advertisers have hung their hats on, that said millennials are a huge generation. They have money to spend, and they have some sort of social expectation from the companies that they interact with, and they want to spend money with brands and organizations that they believe do some sort of social good. And folks distilled those studies into, wow, we need to make that show up in everything that we do. And some of it, I'm sure, is very genuine and authentic, and that's fantastic. I'm not here to beat up for-profit companies. You know, I'm talking to you on an iPhone and a Mac and other, consumer goods that I purchased in my home. So I don't have a problem with folks doing that, and do believe it can be genuine. I think it's different than doing something that's in the public interest. So if you're using the emotions that people experience when they think you're marketing for good or you're doing good, and you're using that as a way to draw someone in so that they'll buy your product or buy your service, great. Advertisers have done that for years. That's not substantially different. It's really just kind of, putting your finger on it and saying, here's what we're doing, and maybe being a little more transparent about it. But that's substantially different than using your communication to try to create some net social or environmental outcome that is in the public interest. And that's the thing that you kind of have to tease out and think about what it is. This is another place where considering the source really, really matters. I do some work with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and we are trying to point at an organization that calls itself, its name is, get ready for this, the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. The Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. You want to know who their single funder is? Philip Morris. Does this make sense? So they are marketing what they believe is for the greater good, but do I trust someone who's telling me, yes, I am doing this, when I know where they derive their profits from? No, of course I'm not. And I also track their actions and see what they're doing and recognize that they're trying to tear apart really good public health policy all around the world. So considering the source really matters. And you have to decide, okay, am I going to listen to Philip Morris or a Philip Morris funded effort about, what we're going to do to have fewer smokers in the world? So they could say that they're marketing for the greater good. I don't really buy it so much. So digging in those kinds of ways matters for sure.
That's an interesting, again, as I talk about understanding your biases and
for sure,
and looking at sources. It's really kind of looking under the hood and see. And as I saw that we had some folks that are here from benefit corporations that are really driven by people, profit, planet, and people. So exactly, they are trying to create that balance. So they're walking.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That's an exciting shift in what we're seeing, I think, in the for-profit world. That
for sure,
a better balance. It's exciting.
Absolutely.
So, and we do have a couple of quick questions here. Jennifer has asked, when tackling crisis communication, how do you handle agency messaging and encouraging desired positive behaviors?
Agency messaging, are we talking about public agencies? I don't know if you're able to answer that, like how a governmental agency, for example, how they message.
And she says yes.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. Thanks for that. So the basics in how an agency communicates about this is first figuring out who the audience is that you're talking to. So if we're talking about kind of a traditional public briefing, let's say, of here's the latest that we know, being really thoughtful about who the messenger is In crisis in particular, traditionally folks go to the most senior official available, because in times of crisis, we all mentally become a bit more conservative, and we look to someone who we perceive as a leader, and usually that's someone more senior. So that's actually, we know enough about how people connect with someone as a messenger that crisis is the one time where it's not necessarily a bad thing to go with the most senior official that an agency has available to them. It's great for it to be someone who could go a little bit of a level deeper maybe, so that if someone's asking them, and if they can't, that they say, I don't know the answer to that, but here's someone who does. And they either engage that person in it the way, so for example, if I were leading a public health briefing right now, I would maybe introduce some talking points and then say, and here is the epidemiologist who knows this way better than me, and is going to stand here and share this with you. Or I would have that person do follow-up. So the messenger matters. And I know you asked about messages, but I specifically am saying this because the messenger in times of crisis matters even more than the message, because that's the person you're establishing a relationship with and determining if you're going to trust the words that are coming out of their mouth. So that really matters. The messages, repetition matters even more. Once again, you're speaking to people who are in a time of worry or concern or confusion, because this is new information that's available to them. It's a changing situation. So repetition matters even more so than it does at other times. So, in a situation like this, the old Walter Cronkite, tell them what you're going to tell them and tell them what you told them, is a good fallback to go to. Make sure that you're repeating that for folks. And then the other pieces in messages that I think we forget about sometimes in moments of crisis is that anything you can reinforce with a visual is particularly helpful in getting folks to remember information. We have the same part of our brain that processes visuals, processes emotion. We attach to that, we connect to it, we tend to remember it better. So the language matters, but if you have a key point and you can convey it in a simple visual, in a simple photo, it's why we see the videos of how to make a mask right now. There's things like that we're using visual because we know it works and is more memorable versus me explaining to you how to make a mask. So think about ways that you can reinforce the words that you're sharing with visuals as well. And I just did like super high level, here's a bunch of crisis stuff. So I hope I answered the question. But Donna, tell me if there's more you want to dig into there.
Well, it actually leads beautifully into our next poll and our next slide and the next question.
Yeah.
Which the question is, actually, let me start with the poll. The poll is, how many of you, how do you determine the messenger for your content? So those of you who are on the call now, who are the folks that you turn to? And this is interesting because the next question was, any tips on convincing leadership to tone down message politicization? And our next slide is actually understanding the importance of tone. So thinking about who's your messenger when your leadership is the messenger, how important is the importance of tone? I think all of those fit really tidily together.
Yeah, they do. I would say I would challenge the assumption that you don't want something to be political, actually, because there are times where you need it to be political.
Right.
And so again, that depends on your audience, what you're trying to achieve. There are, we have this notion of just give me the facts, just be straightforward about it. Don't be, don't politicize of it. And we sadly are at a time where we're no longer debating perspective, but we're debating fact now. And that's a dangerous thing to do. It's a very dangerous thing to do. And so if we're debating what your perspective is as you look at, say, public health data, or what your beliefs are about who should have access to testing, or who should have access to a place where they can get clean water to wash their hands. People have perspectives about things like that. But that's what we used to debate. Now we're debating the data that we're actually having conversations about with that. And so the moment we get into that territory, it is a political discussion, whether we want it to be or not, and we can't shy away from that. So I think that's really important for us to think about. Beyond that, it is a decision that you're making about who the spokesperson is. You know, you really are. If you have someone who you know is polarizing, but they're the most senior person, you probably should find somebody else. Will their ego allow that? Do you have the kind of relationship with that person that you can say, totally get it why you want to be the spokesperson, but if we want to accomplish X, we need someone who can, you know, more effectively give voice to that and engage with this audience. You know, that's the job that we all have, right? That, you know, we're talking to folks saying, here's what I know, you know, that you want to achieve. So I'm walking you through the steps to help you achieve that. And that might mean that you play a different role here, leader, and step to the side and allow someone else to be the messenger.
So that what if we can see, Jessica, the poll answers, it depends on the audience. What a wonderful answer.
Gold stars, gold stars.
Yeah, right. That's an A. So really interesting, great responses. Thank you for that. And so while the question is about what there was about getting your leadership to deal with tone and politicization, boy, isn't that a fun word? And I think I just made a mess of it. What about tone in your messaging and the importance of tone, especially right now?
Yeah, I mean, most simply, I think that goes back to the point I was making about being compassionate. You know, that tone really does matter at this moment. And we need tone to evoke the right emotion at the time, of course, and different emotions. But if we're talking about the context of the world we're living in right now, a signal of compassion and genuine and authentic compassion matters. If the spokesperson, or if, you know, is delivering a message, or if that spokesperson themselves just aren't believable as a compassionate individual, it's going to fall flat. In fact, it can make things worse. So that's an important thing to think about. But it can't just be compassion, because what we're finding now is, you know, a couple months in now, folks are a little fatigued by some of that. How are you? I hope you're doing well. I hope you're taking care. Are you managing everything okay? And so it's a balance of, again, that context, that contextual analysis that you're doing of the landscape in which you're communicating to determine what dosage of that is right in the tone, and then how much of the tone needs to be actionable. Because one of the things that is incredibly important at times like this is that folks recognize the power they have, and they feel some sense of agency to, you know, take charge, to take care of themselves, to, you know, raise funds where they need to see people mobilize where they want them to be. And you want folks to feel that they are tapping into their own power to make things happen still. So balancing within the tone that right amount of compassion and caring that's authentic and genuine with, and here's what we can do, that doesn't feel like I'm making you do all the things and you therefore are responsible for the public health of the globe. You know, like we never want anything to feel that huge, but we also want folks to feel like, hey, I know I can do some things here that are going to make a difference. And, you know, that's, again, to your point earlier, Donna, a lot of this is the basic underpinnings of good communication in any context. A good message always has a good call to action, and it's as specific a call to action as it can be. And that's where that piece of it, of making the tone feel actionable, really comes into play here.
Well, and it's super interesting because we've got all sorts of questions that are popping up as you go along, and and I'm going to back up just a little bit, because Ping asks, what do you mean by debating the fact, which you were just doing a second ago? And how can we debate over what is right or wrong? Isn't that an interesting point right there? When we already have supporting data, and how could it be dangerous?
So I'll go back to one of the examples I was using earlier about gun violence. So there is good data that shows when there's a gun in the home and it's a situation where there's been domestic violence in that home in the past, if there is a gun there, the domestic violence escalates more quickly and more dangerously. And by dangerously, I mean, you know, a much more serious injury or death if there is a gun in that home. We have data that shows us that. Longitudinal data. This isn't data that like somebody came up with last Thursday data. This is a long and large and wide and diverse data set. There are folks who will say, well, actually, no, I don't believe that. I think that's wrong. I think someone made that up. I don't trust that. And that's what I say, where we're now debating facts. Whereas before, someone might have said, well, and what I said that, we could have perspectives on data. One perspective might be, well, if we know that to be true, if someone has been found to perpetuate domestic violence, they should not be allowed to own a gun. That might be one perspective. Another perspective might be, well, you know what, they're still an American and they have a Second Amendment right, and so I think they should be allowed to have a gun. That's the perspective that we can debate. But both can still acknowledge the fact of what we know happens when that gun is in a home where there's been a history of domestic violence. So that's where there's a challenge in that we oftentimes now are having debates about fact instead of about your perspective of how you're going to act based on those facts.
It's why I can't even look at Facebook right now. It's kind of stunning to me because, of course, my roots are all in the southeastern United States. In a very traditionally conservative space. I live in Portland, Oregon, which is a very traditionally more liberal governmental political community. And the debates of what is fact are stunning on Facebook, and it's so insanely divided. And that is the part that breaks my heart and makes me more concerned about the potential, where do we go from here? Which leads me to my the next slide, what do you see are I think we've already done, what are the yes, thank you very much, the greatest challenges ahead. So, and to that, I think that I also want to address Wendy's question that says, any tips for discussing dangerous patterns you see in your own industry? For example, I'm a filmmaker and Michael Moore released an irresponsible film for Earth Day. In a time where our industry has canceled all production, how do we hold ourselves accountable and still support filmmaking? So that's a really interesting challenge.
Well, I think as we set up kind of the notions of challenges and opportunities, it's two sides of the same coin, right? So what's interesting is that, and please know I say this with full respect for the, what folks are experiencing right now during a pandemic. I think at moments like this, at any moment of crisis, the opportunity is that forces us to think about what we're doing in a different way. And we can kind of shirk off, kind of the, we've always done it this way, the status quo. All of a sudden, we give ourselves freedom and permission to think about things in new and creative ways that sometimes can help us to make progress substantially faster. The thing that's tough is, going back to what we were talking about with context, is that not everybody's ready for that conversation. Some folks are really averse to change. They become even more averse to change at a moment where they feel scared or they feel nervous. And so that's where, there are challenges. Having respectful conversations with each other, whether it's in an industry sector, to say, hey, what were you trying to do here? What were you trying to achieve? And assuming some good intention, it can go a long way. What were you trying to achieve? What were you trying to accomplish? Why are you moving forward? Okay, so let's talk about how we can move forward then as an industry. I think that I always, and this is part of, honestly, this is my bias, it's part of how I look at the world. I try to start any kind of engagement like that, assuming good intentions. Most people, and there are some for sure, that go out in the world and say, hey, how can I mess things up and make it really hard for people? Those people live out there. I don't pretend that they don't. Generally speaking, folks are just trying to get by every day. And they want to do a decent job at what they're doing. So I think assuming best intentions is incredibly important, even more so at a time when folks are emotionally charged, where they're tired, where they're feeling stressed. So if you want to have a conversation about, how do we keep the filmmaking industry continuing, and what does continuing look like, or what does it look like in any industry to do that, start at that place rather than a place of kind of accusation. And you'll end up having a much more productive conversation. And I hope I answered the question. If I didn't, Donna, you can tell me if I missed something there.
No, I think it was really relevant. And it's the challenge, it's part of those challenges as we think about the challenges ahead. And I think Lori also asked an interesting question about those challenges. And she asks, when a leader or CEO is hosting an open forum, what are the pros and cons of allowing employees to submit anonymous questions and comments in advance of the event, now in the era of COVID and beyond?
Well, I think that, you know, everyone has to determine their own philosophy on anonymity and when it matters and when it's important. Generally speaking, and I'm generalizing this for sure, it is tougher to be specific and to solve a problem when it's an anonymous question. You have a much higher likelihood to kind of like get at the guts of it and figure out what it is you need to fix if it's not anonymous, because everything's situational, right? So if it's now, and the reason I say that in kind of that, you know, initial way is I also respect that there are some toxic cultures out there, you know, and so if somebody's afraid to ask a question, afraid of retribution, sure, there needs to be an avenue for that. But I would say I would lean toward not being anonymous unless there's a really good reason to be anonymous. And then I also think that it's when there are opportunities to get questions in advance and provide them to a speaker. So if this is like an internal communication kind of session, let's say amongst staff and a leader there, that's a good thing to do too, because you want to give that person the time to prepare and to get the information that they need. It's less about having them feel prepared and deliver something in a way that maybe feels canned. But it's more about if they need to do some research, if they don't know the answer to this, they don't know what the policy is or the law behind why they would articulate something or can't share something, give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be able to, you know, do that kind of research and ask that question. But yeah.
And I know I should have said up front also, my gratitude to Erin, who also serves as one of the people on the Strategic Communication Leadership Network for our graduate
program. Thank you.
Well, and we have some really insightful and enlightening conversations when that leadership network gathers twice a year. And I know one of your colleagues on the network is a strong advocate of turning off comments and turning off the anonymity, referring to it as the new virus. And that was before we had this virus. So as we think about challenges and opportunities, I think it's really important that we're thinking about what is the culture and what are the expectations?
Yeah.
And when do you turn it on and when do you say, wait, this is no longer productive, or this is toxic, or this is hurtful, and it's time to turn it off. So in self-regulation of the culture is part of that often, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, anonymity can lead to bad behavior. And sometimes that's actual anonymity, and sometimes it's perceived anonymity, which we are more likely to have online. You know, and so it can lead to bad behavior. It can lead people to challenge norms in negative ways. So there's a multitude of reasons why anonymity can be a real stinker. So, yeah.
And at the same time, I work in an area where anonymity is very liberating. It breaks that spiral of silence for people who have never been able to speak up because of their race, their gender, their age, their what.
That's right.
So it's finding that balance, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
We are on our last slide, and then we do have a couple of questions that are in hold. If we don't get to them as we get through our opportunities, the greatest opportunities ahead, we'll have a couple of minutes left at the end to answer some of these questions. And if we don't get them during during that hour, we want to be really honor your time. And for those of you who need to leave promptly at 1, you can go, and we will stick around for a few minutes afterwards for after class and get to some of these questions as well. So with that, we are on our final slide. And thanks also for those of you who are in the chat. Feel free to keep chat going and talk about what your experiences are. That doesn't have to be a question, but feed each other with information and insight. It's a great thing. Thank you. So our last thought of this hour is, what do you see as the greatest opportunities ahead?
Well, you know, I think we spoke about a moment ago, is that there are moments in time like this do give us the opportunity to kind of, you know, speed ahead perhaps and find ways that we can create progress around something that we couldn't before. Crises have a tendency to unstick things sometimes. And so that can be one opportunity that can happen. It can stick others though, you know, so like if your issue doesn't map to what's happening and all of a sudden it was top, you know, 3 on somebody's priority list and it drops to 10 now, you know, it can have, you know, an adverse effect too. You know, the other opportunity I think that is an interesting one is less about sort of this moment of the pandemic, but it's more about a moment for our field where we know so much more about how to do our work effectively now than we did certainly when I started doing this 25 or so years ago. You know, we just know a lot more about how to do it. Our field was built on an intensity and a rigor of practice that we would use to make some assertions about what would work, you know, what made a good story, what was structurally going to be engaging for someone. In addition to having that rigor of practice now, you know, our friends and pals in a variety of other fields have given us insights about sociological insights and neurological insights and things that tell us which emotion we map to a specific topic to try to engage someone in a potential behavioral change that we can do with a degree of intention now that we couldn't before. You know, we could test for some things like that, but those of us who do message testing also know that when you test things, sometimes people tell you what they think you want to hear versus what actually works, you know, so none of these things are perfect. So it's a real opportunity for this moment in our field, gaining those kinds of insights from folks who work in all of these other areas that I think before folks would have said, well, that's not really related to it. You know, it's not really related to communication. But man, if I can get 10 minutes with a neurologist, or, you know, I will ask them a bazillion questions if it's going to help me to be smarter and more effective in the work that I'm doing. And we all have that opportunity to do that now, which is a wonderful opportunity because we start out in a better place. We start out stronger in the work that we're doing. And that's an amazing opportunity to have.
And we did have somebody say that they felt like we went to anonymity on challenges. Looping back to challenges, are there others that you see that we really need to be addressing? And for me, I would even be thinking about that spread of misinformation and combating all of the voices that are out there now who have megaphones. And how do we deal with that? I mean, that's me throwing out what I see as a big challenge. Yeah. Would you have others that you could talk about?
Yeah, well, I think we have to name that as propaganda, you know, because that's what it is. And so I think we need to call it. And I think every time we come up with a cute name for it, like fake news, we are not identifying how damaging it is, the intention for it to be damaging and the result of how damaging it actually is. So I think we need to call things what they are. I also think that when we're in a situation of trying to, of folks debating facts, we go into, and anyone on this call who, there's a couple of folks who I know I've worked with in classes and at the university and beyond. You've heard me say this before, probably. But the thing that happens when we begin debating facts is we go into Mythbuster mode and we end up repeating the wrong information. We do what you might think is so-and-so, but this is actually the truth. And the moment we do that, we further cement the wrong information in someone's brain. It's the reason we still have people who say, well, isn't it only like 90-some% of scientists who agree that humans accelerate climate change? Instead of saying, there is broad and vast agreement within the scientific community about what humans do relative to climate change. We do that Mythbuster thing. And at a moment like this is a real challenge that we have, where folks are going to say, well, you might have heard that you don't have to wear a mask there. Great. You just told me I don't have to wear a mask there.
Right.
And that's what that reinforces in my mind versus but what you really should do. So that's a real specific kind of challenge that we have at this moment in time.
That's brilliant. I mean, so spot on. Thank you very much for that. And as I am looking at the clock, we are in our last 2 minutes. It just flew by. I want, and for those students I'm saying that because we have a couple of students who've actually asked some questions, and I know are eager to, I hope you'll have a minute to stick around and we can get to these once we hit our 1 o'clock stop. But I also want to mention those students are going to be so lucky because Erin is also teaching our campaign planning and management class in just a couple of weeks or week.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
We're really thrilled to have you continue to be part of this strategic communication program. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I also want to say a special thanks to Erica and Jessica, who are the people behind the curtain, making sure that everything is working right. I want to thank all of the people who have attended our inaugural School of Journalism and Communication at the University of Oregon Better Together webinar. And we do have another one coming up in May on engaged journalism, and one that'll be in June on in my area of research, which is talking about social virtual worlds and being social online at a time when, and the importance of those communities in a time where everybody is living in isolation. So, with that, don't let the, okay, I'm seeing these questions pop up. Thank you again, Erin. Thank you to everybody who's been here. And for those who want to stick around, we'll be happy to continue to answer these questions for a few minutes. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all.
Ed, let me dive into some of the questions that are here that are, because I am not able to read the chat and talk and read questions at the same time. I'm going to go straight to the questions in the order that they came. Kay asks, do you have any advice about how to communicate with policymakers to make them more aware of the impacts of COVID-19 on vulnerable families, those with low socioeconomic status and families with young children?
Yeah. So it depends on the policymaker. I'll start by saying, because what part of, because we're in the political world the minute you ask that question, obviously. And so unfortunately now that means we're debating facts. So if I provide information to someone to say, this community is experiencing the effects of COVID in a more substantial way because it's a community that is primarily people of color who traditionally haven't had access to healthcare services, who haven't had access to good quality food, that are, living a life that's a product of structural racism in this town in this way, then I need to know, does that policymaker track? Do they pay attention to that? Or do I need to find a different entry point for them? So it really is it's really important to know who that policymaker is, what they pay attention to, what they believe. That's the conversation you'd hope you could have with a policymaker, right? Is to say, look, we know all of this to be true, and this is what social justice looks like, and this is how you should address it. But the fact of the matter is, in one community or with one policymaker, you may not be able to say that. You might have to talk about the economic outcomes of what's going to happen and the loss that they're going to see and how that's going to, cause them to look like a failed policymaker. And so, the entry points are going to be substantially different because the one thing in common with most policymakers is they want to continue to be a policymaker. They want to stay in office. And so you can usually start from that point, but there aren't too many things that you can generalize beyond that.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's see. Chris Chandler asked if either of us have been following the Steakum Twitter and have any
Would you
thoughts.
say that again, Donna? All of a sudden the audio got a little bit garbled. The internet the tubes were full.
Chris Chandler was asking if either of us have been following the Steakum Twitter.
If either of us have been following, I'm sorry, is all I heard. So perhaps you could answer.
The Steakum Twitter.
The Steakum Twitter, yes. Go ahead, yeah, please.
I've only been hearing how wonderful it is, but I haven't had time to actually go and figure out what that actually means.
Yeah, no, I think the reason the Steak-umm Twitter works, Wendy's did something like this a while ago. You know, there's a lot of brands that have done this. And I think the reason they work is the authenticity. They don't try to be something bigger than what they are or they aren't. They're authentic in the moment. And that's why people pay attention to them and engage with them. So that's the best lesson, I think, with anything like that, is to be authentic in that kind of moment. And yeah, it's just a really nice looking for the emotion that people want. Do people want some silliness? Do they want some joy? You know, do they need some of that injected into their life? There are, you know, or are they looking for something? Are they looking for something different, a different emotional, you know, kind of connection point? So it's, you know, I can talk about like Spitfire. For our social media, we've been really thoughtful and respectful about not pushing, you know, only pushing things out that we think are going to be helpful to people. So a tool that we give to a nonprofit that we say, hey, this might help you right now. That's the only kind of thing that we're going with. But we also, in addition, we have a page on our website called Pet Fires. And it's all our dogs and cats and birds and, you know, that we hang out with at home. And, you know, during this time, you know, when we're all working at home, we said, you know what, people need a little moment of joy in their life. So it's fine for us to share that. So if you go to that page or look at social media, you're going to meet my little dog, Bodie, and he's, you know, he's 20 pounds of fury. And you're going to know that he thinks he's in charge of the world. And that does, in fact, he just almost on cue decided to bark for you. But does that matter in terms of making me a better communicator? Not necessarily, but when you get to know someone a little bit better as a person, that's when the authenticity comes out. And so that's why things like the Steak-umm things work, or the Wendy's thing worked, or, you know, so on, or the chicken sandwich thing with Popeyes, or any of that. So yeah,
right.
That's why those things matter.
And I think authenticity is one of those words that everybody is getting a sense of. I find it exceptionally charming to watch Jimmy Fallon's daughter climb all over him, and that you're seeing people without, you know, without hair color or without, you know, their nails done, and they don't have a whole staff of people working on their makeup. So it's like we're seeing people in a way more authentic way that I personally find really refreshing. And I'm hearing that echoed out there right now in a really wonderful way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's one of those long-term changes that we also might see as we move along, is where do we, you know, say we don't need all that other stuff. Let's just be more authentic.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Yeah.
Me too. Olivia's the next question. She says, as a young communications professional, what are your top 2 pieces of advice for crisis communications in terms of being a junior person given a crisis communications task, whether it's a press release or response, such as?
I would say anticipate as much as you can. So, you know, pull back, look at the world, and see what the different scenarios are that are out there. So if you're in a crisis, if you can say, okay, based on what we know today, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Lay out what those 3 paths are. Do it in your mind, do it in a list of bullets for each one, and think, okay, as a communicator, how do I prepare for each of those? I mean, that's the most basic way. So if you're able to anticipate, then you're able to plan. You're able to say, okay, if we go down this road, these are the folks we're going to need to partner with. This is what the message we're going to need to articulate to invite people in to work with us. So anything that you're able to do to anticipate is really useful. The other thing that is incredibly helpful in a moment of crisis is if you can write well and write well quickly, you are going to be really valuable. I mean, every crisis I have ever worked, and I've worked a couple of doozies, I am incredibly grateful for the journalism education that I have, because I had professors that would say, okay, great, welcome to class, go find a story, come back, you know, do the research, come back, write it, you have 2 hours. And, you know, having that experience, amongst some others, taught me to write pretty well, pretty quickly. And if you can do that in moments of crisis, you're going to be incredibly valuable. You're going to help make progress. You're going to help, you know, find solutions for folks, and you're going to help, you know, your colleagues feel really supported too. And you're going to build really great relationships with them.
Great advice. and I know that we both came from a journalism school, that a
Yeah.
fact error, gators that we are, a fact error meant an F, done, you know.
Oh yeah, and a misspelling was a fact error.
Exactly.
Yep.
It made you be a good writer fast.
That's
so,
right.
I think we might have time for one or two more questions. Colby's was next. And if we don't get to your question, I think that Jessica will put, I know my email, and if it's okay to share your email, Erin, if people want to reach out directly with questions, that would be
no problem.
terrific, and we'll do what we can to respond and as soon as we can. But in the meantime, Colby's question is, we all know the inherent value of communications, but we also know that marketing and comms are one of the first budgets cut during recession. Ouch, so true. Given the economic outlook, what conversations would you be having now with leadership who may be focused on the immediate crisis and not thinking about messaging or comms investments 6 months from now to emphasize the value of comms in the recovery in coming quarters? Great question, Colby.
It is a good question. And I think it's a responsibility that we all have to talk about the importance of strategic communications, which is different than transactional communications. So if someone thinks communication means I go to you so you can write a news release, write a tweet, you know, you put together a deck for me. If that's their view of communication, it's our responsibility to say, sure, that might be part of it, but tell me what it is you're trying to achieve. Let's figure out what that objective is, and then we'll figure out, do you need, you know, a social media post? Do you need to have a news event? And pivoting people in that way is not only smarter for making their communication more effective, but all of a sudden you're a whole lot more valuable and a lot less likely to get cut if you're having a strategy conversation versus, hey, you're the person who's just going to write tweets for us. So pivoting that conversation is key in a crisis. It's key on any other day of the week. And most of the time when I have conversations with organizations about communications, they start with things like, can you get me an op-ed in the Washington Post? And my answer is usually, yeah, probably, but why do you want it? What is it that you're trying to achieve?
Right.
And then we have the strategy conversation. And that's what protects you in times of recession. I mean, is it a, you know, perfect shield? Of course not. You know, there are realities that we'll see that every industry, you know, is going to face in some way or another. But if you can pivot in that way, you will be substantially more valuable.
Right, right. I remember one of my favorite things that Mickey Knoll, when he was the VP at Ogilvy, to say that every client would come in and say, we want to be on Oprah, you know, or we want to be on Ellen. And it's like, why do you want to do that? You know, what do we even know about those target audiences? What kind of message is going to convey there, and to what effect? So I loved what you started with in change communication, that it's not necessarily about reaching those millions. It's not about being that social media influencer. It's about understanding your target audience and making true change where it really matters.
With them, yeah.
So do you have time for one more?
One more, yep.
Okay, and this one comes from Jules. And Jules, who I think you will also see in just a week or so, says, any advice for those running for office? And there's somebody else who said, great question, because this person's wife is also running for office in May, who cannot knock on doors or have in-person fundraisers.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. So I will start this by saying I can offer some broad communications expertise. I don't do candidate work. Any of the campaign work I do tends to be either administrative or legislative policy or public education campaigns. But it's causing some folks to think pretty differently about how they're getting in touch with folks. The challenge is that there is a perception in this country that we've addressed the digital divide when we haven't addressed the digital divide. So it can't mean that all the communications move online. But there are still, it's interesting, I think, to look at local elections when we think about something like this, because direct mail still plays a pretty substantial role in local elections, particularly when you're targeting specific communities, either physical community or a certain ethnic community, because you're able to speak to someone in their first language. And so that can be a really useful thing to look at right now. I was actually just talking with a public affairs pal last night who was looking at where he's going to go with things, and they're making bigger investments in mail than they have in a while. Now, is mail safe? I don't know. Does everybody stand on their front porch and Lysol it the way I do? Maybe. I don't know. But, and then it has like a decontamination table in the garage. Like, do most people do this? I don't know. This is the downside of having done a lot of public health work, though. That's what I do. But I still read it. And that's part of what we're trying to assess. So I think it is going to be some new creative thinking about online messaging and online tactics. And I think, you know, we're seeing this potential for mail to play a greater role. And then at the most complex level, I think where is the larger conversation we're all having about what we're doing to get folks to be able to register to vote, you know, remotely, so they're not having to go in to vote, so that we don't have more people like the 6 in Wisconsin, you know, who now have the virus because they, you know, the first ones we've heard about, obviously, that, you know, wanted so badly to vote and now they're sick. So that's the other, you know, obvious complexity that we're really needing to tackle right now, is everything that we can do to create supports for people so that they're able to vote. That's something that I think all of us probably really want.
Amen. And what a note to finish on. Thank you again so very
Thanks so much. Thanks. It's fun to get to talk with you. Yeah.
I feel so lucky that I just get to have these kind of conversations.
Oh, Donna and I have a good time together.
And thank you to all of you who stuck around for
Yes.
and this time after the fact. Also know that you can click on chat, and if you push on the little 3 buttons, you can say save chat. And that way you can go back and read through what folks had said if you missed that earlier. And with that, we are right at 1:15, so we've got to go. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Erin.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks to all of you.
Thank you all very much.
All right.
Bye.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.